that's on the Geshe Thubten and then Mokuri Koa the Shemba, and then Mountain Shemba, and then Zimbabwe, a Shemba she Shemba she. Sunday, Shemba she part who is the bamboo who is Sunday, Niki Pang do that. The Niki Shemba she Nimbo the Ganas Kongu Redana, dealership Shemba the Nimbo Tela, and to be said in that Chiwamita Comyata, and then Chiwamita Comyata, and then Danger Genshin, Danger much to Enchawata, and then Yakawa, and then Jeep Lawa, and Chiwamita Comyati, said to Shemba Nimbo Nati. Chiwamita Comyata, Danger Muche, and then Danger Muche, Yakawa, Topkawa, Yakawa, Danger Muche, Genshin, Yakawa, and then Jeep Lawa. Chiwamita, then sometimes Bendigo yes.
So good evening. In last week we started to look at the text parting from the four clingings. And these were the four clingings were outlined in the third verse. If you cling to this life, you're not a practitioner. If you cling to the three realms, that is not renunciation. If you cling to self-interest, you're not a bodhisattva. If grasping arises, it is not the view. So, in the commentary, we covered the verses last week relating specifically to clinging to this life. And we spoke about, these four clingings are what need to be abandoned. Then last week we looked at the first of the four, the clinging to this mere life. And we looked at what the antidote is that we need to cultivate within ourselves so as to abandon the clinging to this mere life. And that is to the reflections on the two topics of this human rebirth that we've attained, which is so precious in that it can achieve such great meaning and also its great rarity. And then following from this is the second, the key antidote, which is the reflection on the impermanence of this life, or often translated as death and impermanence. It comes down to the impermanence of this opportunity, the impermanence of this precious human rebirth. So these are the two key antidotes, precious human rebirth and the impermanence of this life. These are the key antidotes to abandoning, clinging to this mere life.
The Zimba Juna said Zimba said and the Parmala and the Gargo, Dame to be shed of Congo, Restina, Dame to be shed of Congo, yes, all those Shimba Shidi, Nimbo Commodity, yes, and that don't you.
Moreover, last week we briefly mentioned, and I'll mention again now, that these four clingings that need to be parted from or abandoned, and that is done through the cultivation of the antidotes. So we mentioned briefly the antidotes last time, and I'll mention them again now. So the second clinging is the clinging to cyclic existence, or as the verse says, the three realms. So how does one go about abandoning clinging to cyclic existence? This is through reflecting on the faults of cyclic existence, gaining clarity that samsara itself is pervaded by faults. And then so that will be the second of the four clingings to be abandoned. The first was to this life, the second was to samsara in its entirety, and the third is clinging to self-interest. So self-interest we usually express as the self-cherishing mind. So this is the third clinging that needs to be abandoned. And the self-cherishing mind or self-interest, this is abandoned through the cultivation of the antidote of bodhicitta. Then the fourth of the clingings is grasping. So this refers to true grasping. And true grasping needs to be abandoned, and it's abandoned through the antidote of cultivating the wisdom, realizing emptiness. So these are the four clingings with their four antidotes. The majority of our 3 sessions last weekend, the previous weekend, was looking at the how to cultivate the antidotes to clinging to this life, how to cultivate a broader mind, a mind that is not narrow, just striving for the happiness and the abandonment of suffering of this mere life. And the 2 antidotes were firstly to reflect on this precious human rebirth that we ourselves have achieved through the cultivation of the causes in previous lives, and reflect on why this life is so precious. And this understanding arises through seeing the great meaning, the great purpose that we can achieve in this life. And then when we give rise to an appreciation for the preciousness of this life through the sense of understanding what can be achieved, we then go on to cultivate the second key antidote, which is to reflect on the impermanence of this life, to reflect that this life approaches its end moment by moment by moment. So as each moment passes, our lifespan is reducing. The end of this life is ever nearing. And when this life ends, and its ending is certain, when that ending comes, this body ceases. Our continuum, though, continues, and it continues into our next life. And that next rebirth is only in one of 2 directions. It's either going to be another good rebirth like we've achieved now, so rebirth in the happier states, or we fall into the low realms, the suffering states. But that's only one of those 2 areas where we will be reborn.
It's not that. 먼저 가상 이 주의가 주름 소야 되스. 내내 예상 주름 소야 될 때에 네 불론 마선은 깨워지만 마선 중에 타고 타는 거 토부도 산지 네 주름 소가 있나 아니디 아니 깨워지만 하는 거 유체 거래 나선에 타는 거 유체 거래스. 네 그지 내내 이거 쉬어.
So there are only these two directions of rebirth that we will take, either in a happy migration or in the lower realms. And what is the cause to be born in a happy migration? That cause is the accumulation of virtue. And what is the cause of being reborn in the lower realms? It's accumulation of non-virtue. Whichever of those imprints ripen at the time of death is the direction that our rebirth is propelled towards, that our continuum is propelled towards. And so now reflecting on the unwanted states of rebirth, those of the lower realms, these are the causes to be born there, are the non-virtuous imprints that we accumulate, and we accumulate them through any of our three doors. In other words, through physical, non-virtuous activities, such as killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct, or through verbal, non-virtuous activities, such as harsh speech, lying, divisive speech, and idle speech, or through our mental process, just through negative thoughts, such as covetousness and harmful intent and wrong views. So these are the 10 non-virtues that are performed either physically, verbally, or merely mentally. And they lead to the accumulation of non-virtue, which, if ripens as a rebirth, can only ripen as a rebirth in the suffering realms. When we gain certainty of this understanding, the wish to be freed from such a rebirth will naturally arise. And how does one attain a freedom from such a rebirth? This comes through restraining our mind. Through restraining our mind, we thereby restrain our non-virtuous physical activity and verbal activity as well. We need to see that the importance of not falling to this lower realms is, of course, because of the great suffering that is experienced there, but also that it's impossible to spiritually develop there because the suffering is so intense. One doesn't even come to meet the Dharma, and therefore one cannot spiritually develop. So here then, when having reflected like this, we'll want to close the door to rebirth in the lower realms. That means we'll want to restrain our mind, develop a mind of restraint. And a mind of restraint is the practice of ethical conduct. So when we talk about, in the Buddhist context, about being an ethical person or practicing ethical conduct, this means developing a mind of restraint. And it's through restraining our thought process, we restrain our physical and verbal behavior too. And then last time we looked at in some detail the importance of developing this mind of restraint, the practice of ethics, and that it needs to be motivated by the sincere wish not to be reborn in the lower realms.
니 토비아는 전달라 주면서 예제들이 주름 소야래. 나도 주름 소야 찍고 점이 지고 말디알이 하나 좀 대주기 밀고 치세 토고라. 디 토바라 네 제리야 집바다 수준다 가서 집바다随便냐면 집에냐면 아니随便냐면 전주 아니 제와치나 바다는 거봐 톱지 된데야 최나마다 냐면지야 라와쇼 제 이내기 몰람 집에다 참자지 어두스 몰람자지 고래 세상에 주준 집어 제가 전주 되는 전주 가서 몰람자 어두스네 아주 제와치나 하나님 거와 토야기 나선을 타야기 규제라 디고 뭐에 해서지 가서 되게 쉬어라.
And moreover, last time we spoke about that the practice of ethical conduct, developing this mind of restraint, this is the primary cause that leads to a good rebirth, a rebirth as a human or God. But in order to have a rebirth that is precious, a precious human rebirth marked with all the 18 qualities, we need to accumulate further causes. And we spoke then those further causes are cultivating the generous outlook, a generous attitude, the practice of generosity. Then thirdly, so the first was ethics, the second was generosity, the third is developing a patient outlook, the practice of patience, and fourth was joyous perseverance, and then fifthly, making prayers, making aspirational prayers to achieve good rebirths, so that one can continue one's spiritual progression. So we also looked at that last time. Then, furthermore, last week we spoke about that without this wish to strive to ensure that one does not fall into the lower realms, but rather accumulates the causes to achieve a good rebirth as a human or God. If one lacks such a wish, one's mind will stay dominated by the thoughts of worldly happiness, of achieving a mere success, the success merely of this life, and overcoming the mere problems and difficulties of this one life. So this outlook, which is going to be one with great attachment to material gain and repulsion towards material loss, and attachment to worldly pleasures and repulsion to worldly displeasures, and include an attachment to pleasing speech and repulsion towards displeasing speech, as well as attachment to praise and repulsion towards scorn. Those eight worldly concerns, they dominate the mind of those whose primary motivation, whose thoughts are primarily concerned with achieving happiness now, this mere life, and overcoming the problems and difficulties of this one life. And the great fault of being under the influence of these eight worldly concerns, well, there's several, but it means primarily we can say, or one of the main faults, is that when we attach to gain and to pleasure and pleasing speech and praise, this leads to strong attachment for us to strive to achieve these things. And this leads to us engaging in negative activities to fulfill our desires. And likewise with the other four which we are repulsed towards, to not encounter these. Then further attachment arises or aversion arises, and more negativities are accumulated. So here we were encouraged last week to look at our motivation and see where these eight worldly concerns influence our motivation, because they lead to the accumulation of causes that when they ripen, will ripen in rebirths in the lower realms.
타다미고 토우도 선비 군론 디토네 아니 최슈인 삼제는 주고 냐바냐 산디 개와치 타다미고 최체도 됐어. 나 되네 많이 봐서 세대를 약속도 오다 당년다 여러다 지진 주게 동이 내제 먹고 니스 먹고 신鲜的 먹고 싶은 거 깨라지 못 차야다. 니 콜 먹고 뒤에다 안 되려나 미고 먹고 라야 되네 삼다제 제가 있나 안디 나도 최 기부 총보다 지금의 친구 관계가 최체도 말해 되는다. 내내기 지겨 말해서 지금 개발 되는지 어디 볼 수 있었어요.
Last weekend, having looked at those 5 causes that are required to achieve a good rebirth, that is the cultivation of the minds of ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and then making prayers for good rebirths. One then needs to give great power to these meditations. One needs to cultivate knowledge. One needs to receive teachings from one's teacher, so that one has is gaining ever greater knowledge that one can then reflect on. So we looked at the need to hear teachings or to study and to reflect on those teachings. And so here we spoke about the need to receive teachings and then meditate on them or reflect on them as guided by one's teacher. And that is all to be done with appropriate motivation. The motivation of wanting to fulfill one's spiritual goals of, in this case, achieving a good rebirth. And that motivation, followed by these activities of hearing teachings and reflecting on them, is what is required for one to be considered, as we see in the 3rd verse, a practitioner. Whereas if one does receive teachings and reflect on them, but without the required motivation, then one cannot be considered a practitioner, because one will have a motivation influenced by the 8 worldly concerns, wanting to be praised by others, wanting to have a good reputation, maybe hoping to become a teacher so that one can become even more famous and have many students and impress others. So those kinds of faulty motivations, even if one is engaging in study and reflection, doesn't make one a practitioner. So the need to hear or study and then reflect, these 2 come as part of a group of 3, and that is study, reflect, and meditate. So we looked at the first 2 last time, and tonight we'll start with the 3rd, meditation. So in the sequence of hearing or study, reflection on what one studied, and then meditating on what one's reflected on, we now come to meditation.
That's it. Gomba Gibi Kansa Kuns, Yamombo, Yebochen, Talam Jube, Tawachen, Sanje Jube, 17, Gomba, the Meta Vita DS.
So let's go to the 11th verse. So just to say as an aside, most Tibetan texts in verse form, the lines are just together. They're not broken up into 4s. So his breaks will not necessarily match what we see here. So we're going to start at the 11th verse, the 2nd line. All who undertake meditative practice are endowed with the antidote to their afflictions. They possess the root of the path to liberation. They possess the seed of Buddhahood, so you cannot do without meditative practice.
기부 최고 남기는 거 보면 야생을 공부하기 가서 보이지. 기부 중요한 남기는 거 보면 기부 챙겨 남기는 거 보면 그래서 기부 중에 남기는 거 보면 공헌 얘네 기부 챙겨 남기는 거 보면 제 양내지게 가서 가르치 있네서 공부하기 가서 보이지.
So looking at the first of these lines, perhaps the second in verse 11, all who undertake meditative practice. So this refers to, all here refers to, those who are engaging in the meditations that are in accordance with the being of smallest capacity, as well as it refers to those who are undertaking the meditations in accordance or in common with the being of intermediate capacity, as well as those who are undertaking the meditations that are unique to the being of greatest capacity. So all three scopes are included here in that first word, all.
Kolye Duma, Mason Duma, Targo, Tarne, Yawachama Hadam, Mato, Tabu, Samje, and did Duni Duba, and Duba Jeje, and did Tobe to Nalima is Niger to Chum Soya, that's in Chum Soya, then a robot, Adi, Rohoti, Chiba, Chimen, and Suven, and Jurin, Sunday Yame, Pasap Jurin Yamen, the Molam, or the Yamen Chedi, that do Chedi, the Kibuchum and Bokaza, this or that.
These three scopes, or the beings of varying mental capacity. This refers to, so the first of those, the being of smaller scope, or smallest capacity. Those practices that are in common with the being of smallest capacity, we looked at them last time. So this is a practitioner whose mind is, as he has given rise to this overwhelming or this dominating wish, not to fall in the lower realms, and to ensure that that door is closed and that a good rebirth is achieved in their next life. And with such a motivation, they are ensuring that their mind is ethical at all times, and in order to, and in a conjunction with this ethical outlook, they're developing the minds of generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and making prayers. So these are the practices motivated to achieve a good rebirth that a being of smallest capacity engages in.
지상 다음에 또 비셔를 고음 전에 또 다음에 또 비셔를 고 대라님도 지금 주전서가 좀 삼대 이거에 보고 같이 로마티고 지상 대전 냠들 제발을 때네 탈보고 또 그래야지 지상다 님보시비 다음에 또 비셔를 녀모고 빠에 녀모데 다음에 또 비셔를 해서 녀모고 녀모지에서 녀모고 녀모시비.
And the next line, endowed with the antidote to their afflictions. So the first line, we referred there to the being of smallest capacity. The second line now, or the third line in our verse, explicitly refers to the beings of intermediate capacity or middling capacity. So their capacity is that to achieve liberation from suffering, to achieve liberation from samsara. That is the extent of their capacity. So they have given rise to a genuine wish to definitely emerge from the suffering states of samsara and attain liberation from suffering. So they are striving single-pointedly to achieve liberation. And to achieve liberation, they've recognized the cause that keeps us bound in the suffering states of samsara. And that is the contaminated karma that we accumulate through our own afflicted minds. And that without eliminating these afflicted minds, no liberation is possible. So this they've recognized clearly. And moreover, they've recognized the very root cause that is keeping us bound within suffering, and that is the ignorance of self-grasping. And it's this mind, the ignorance of self-grasping, or can also be called ignorance of true grasping, that leads to all the other afflictions and the accumulation of contaminated karma. So this has to be abandoned. So this they've recognized, and furthermore, they've recognized the antidote to this root cause of our suffering, which is the wisdom realizing selflessness. So it's through developing a mind of wisdom they overcome the ignorance, and in the particular type of wisdom that's needed to overcome that particular type of ignorance, the ignorance of self-grasping, is the wisdom realizing selflessness. So that is the antidote that they are cultivating. This is their practice of wisdom. And in conjunction with this practice of wisdom, developing the wisdom realizing selflessness, they are also engaging in cultivating the minds of ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and then concentration. So the same four as before, but with concentration and wisdom.
아니 마서 동말에 타네 개와치마 아가미고 토고도 선배 삼게 돈이 좀 받게지 아니 유마 예수 예제도 출루수에 봐 출루수 지상 출루하고 소용도 출루수와 내가 때네 아니 코르에 동말에 코르에 동말에 괜 딱 코르에 괜 통화치 코와에 타고 선배 코와를 타르게 삼기고 그랬어 코와를 타르게 삼기에 나 코와에 유 녀모바디 뽀에기 탑시 비치고 그래. 탑시 비치고 그래. 제가 이 point 탑시
그래 탑시 되냐.
녀모고 point 거기 녀모고 point 비치고 그래. 제가 이 point 비치고 이 point 녀모 가르쳐서 다음에 또 비셔를 하시면 다음에 또 비셔라. 다음에 또 무슨 다음에 제가 다음에 또 비셔를 기고 그래. 제가 이 나보고는 마성의 동안에 타르게 된다는 내가 예수님이 출임되고 매나 야고 마성가 있나 아니 코와레 타르게 삼바기 두 말에서 얘네기 코와레 타르게 삼바기 맞나 거기 영향이 유명하고 빠야기 아니 삼바디 두 말에서 이 말에나 다음에 또 두 말에서 진짜 이 인자 코와라 코위 유명하고 빠야기 예보 다음에 또 비셔를 끼워와요 아니 용어 예수 예지도 출임이라고 쓰고 그래서 제가 출임이 용어 예수 예지도 출임이 유지해 발을 때네 나중에 다음에 또 비셔를 끼고 제가 명목고에 예보 젠세를 가르고 젠세를 먹이 되는데 용어 예수 예지도 출임되고 제가 용어 예수 예지도 출임 될 때네 남 명목고에 예보 다음에 또 비셔를 끼고 그래서
Staying here with our third line, endowed with antidote to the afflictions. So such a practitioner of middling capacity, will certainly have given rise already to the wish for a good rebirth, because that is a previous realization, a previous attainment. And giving rise to the wish for a good rebirth, not to fall into the lower realms, leads to the aspiration to guard one's ethics, to develop an ethical outlook, develop this mind of restraint, and always act under the influence of this mind of restraint. And then independence on this ethical conduct. So that's a training relating to the previous level of practitioner. Independence on that mind of ethics. This practitioner now, of a greater capacity, being of intermediate capacity, is able to reflect on the faults of samsara and come to see how suffering pervades cyclic existence. So there's this relationship of dependency, that independence on the realization that comes with the being of smallest capacity, who then develops the mind of ethical conduct. Independence on that mind of ethical conduct, a practitioner can develop themselves further and meditate and come to realize the faults of samsara. But to realize the faults of samsara, they need a basis of ethics. Then when they realize that cyclic existence is pervaded by suffering, they will want to give rise to the cause of cyclic existence, these afflicted minds. But they'll realize that the only way to completely eliminate the afflicted minds is to develop the wisdom realizing selflessness, and that means they'll be ready to investigate, to meditate on selflessness. But in order to get to this point where they can effectively meditate on selflessness, they have to have come to realize that cyclic existence comes from, or is created by, our contaminated karma, which comes from our afflicted minds, which comes from the root cause of the ignorance of self-grasping. And that connection can only be understood through the prior realization that the whole of cyclic existence is pervaded by suffering, through coming to clearly see the faults of samsara. And in order to come to realize these faults of samsara, the basis of ethics is required. So there's a stream of connection which is hopefully clear, and starts with ethical conduct. So this is crucial. Ethics is crucial not only to achieve a good rebirth as a human or a god, but it's on this basis that the following realizations also come, the realizations of the being of intermediate capacity. So without ethics, it's not possible to realize the sufferings of samsara. Without realizing the sufferings of samsara, it's not possible to effectively meditate on selflessness, and therefore it's not possible to attain liberation. So therefore, ethical conduct is crucial. And another way that we can then read this third line, endowed with the antidote to the afflictions, is the person who is endowed with the antidote to the afflictions possesses ethics, is an ethical person. So that is the meaning implied in this line.
And then this, somebody talam to be our chance. Tarbe lam to be our chance that you should do over. Talam to be Tarbe lam is Nyomoba, Sabon Jeba, Bambi, Tapache. Indeed, we are Lam Gomia de la Garcom Borsene, that Nabo Koala, Tardy, Koala, Yuan Daj, Koala, Tardy, Samba. Yes, and Tabasa Topulus in the Asian Samba. Koala, Yuan Daj, Koala, the Tarabulus and then Koala, Tardy, Samba. And then Koala, Tarby, Tarba Topulus and the Tarba the Samba. Then the Tarba Toya, Dondala, the Niki, Tarba Topulus and Dondala, Jimbe Yamacha, Children Yamacha, Jimbo Yamacha, and there's something done about the Sheva Nyomo, Koala, Tavala, Nyomo, Bambo, Nyomo, Yembo, Dame Bato, Shera Comche, Lam Yame, Denigi Yaman Cheva, Dene Tarbato. She's on Tarbato, Lam Yaman Jagi, so the Zawa Masona, she's a Masona Dampo, you are using Yiju to Children Yahosumo. She's not using Yiju to Children Yahosumo, Dene, on the Tarbato, Lam Yaman Jagi. You are using Yiju to Children Mason Waina, and the Tarbato Lam Yamede Yahotumbanes. She's not any you are using Yiju to Children, Tarbato Lam Gomegi, she's a Masona Zawa, she's a Masona. The Kanban Mason, many Zitan, Zawa Mason, Zawa chance.
The fourth line in the 11th verse, they possess the root of the path to liberation. So the liberation then is the state of cessation of having abandoned the afflicted minds together with their seeds. So that is what such a practitioner is striving to achieve, and a cessation of having abandoned the afflicted minds together with their seeds. In order to actually achieve this state of liberation, they need to cultivate the path to liberation. So the path to liberation comes about through reflecting on the faults of cyclic existence, the faults of samsara, and coming to see that samsara is pervaded by suffering. There's nothing worthy of hoping for within the realms of samsara. There's no peace to be found within samsara. And through effective meditation here, the mind that is definite about wanting to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara is generated, the mind of definite emergence. And this is the wish to strive for liberation. So here the practitioner's mind is no longer dominated just by the wish for a good rebirth. They are striving with everything they say, do, or think to achieve liberation. And in order to fulfill this aspiration, they engage in cultivating the minds of ethical conduct, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom, the 6 that were mentioned a few moments ago. But here, a point I really want to emphasize, because it's imperative that this is clear to everyone, that in order to give rise to the realization of the faults within samsara, that samsara is pervaded by faults, and therefore give rise to the mind of definite emergence, and thereby be able to strive for liberation through cultivating the mind, such as the wisdom realizing selflessness, etc., and so forth. The basis, the foundation, is ethical conduct, the mind of restraint, the mind that is restrained, and therefore our physical actions and our verbal actions are restrained. Without this ethical outlook, then one cannot embark on the path to liberation. One would lack the foundation to embark on the path to liberation. In the first line in the 12th verse, they possess the seeds of Buddhahood. The seed of Buddhahood refers to the primary cause of Buddhahood. This is the mind of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is cultivated through the generation of great love and great compassion, and these develop to the strength where bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, is generated within oneself. The mind of enlightenment, or the mind, or bodhicitta, is the single-pointed wish to strive to become a Buddha in order to lead sentient beings to a state freed from suffering. So it has these two components: striving for enlightenment for the sake of others. And then, with bodhicitta generated, those same 6 practices we heard about before are engaged in: ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. And these same practices, though, are now conjoined with the mind of bodhicitta, and therefore they are called the 6 perfections. And it's these 6 perfections that are, being perfections, they are conjoined with bodhicitta, that these are the causes, or the root, or the seed we have here, the seed for Buddhahood. So the seed for Buddhahood is bodhicitta together with the 6 perfections.
Dinyamne Jabala, Nirani, Kowalia, Tarku, Semi, Koala Tarki, Nation, somebody Makevina, Sosura, Koval, Nation, Sabamakina, Koval Tarjas and Jam Sayuva to Semi, somebody today, Koala Tarki, Nation, Kyoto. Then Koala Tarki, Nation, Koala, the Tarku, and Koala, Guan Koala, Tarku, somebody number of Yakujavala, and Desi Cargos. Also, we do not let Tarku to send 나좀 동안에 탈두게 삼바데 슈치고 깨고 그랬어. 지상 나좀 동안에 탈두게 삼바 깨지는 누가 예수 예수님의 수준 보고 그래서 지상 누가 예수님의 예수의 수준 이메나 이제 예수 고발을 때 예수 끼고 말해 예수 끼마도나 장미지 공투 말해 된 자주생 공투 말해 얘는 바주주의 냠는 제와 제투 말해 상기 고바 투 유사투 말해 지상 상기 고바 토바라양 냠는 상기 고바 투 남 냠는 제바라 보자와 같이 보세는 누가 예수 예수의 수준 수고 해서 정말 상기 주의 세븐 젠스 상기 고방기 토베 남 냠는 제기 세븐 마슨 조어의 당보디 아니 누가 예수 예수의 수준 수고 해서
So in order to achieve Buddhahood, the bodhisattva, the being who aspires to become a bodhisattva, has to generate bodhicitta and then engage in the practices of a bodhisattva, in the activities of a bodhisattva, which are the 6 perfections. In order to get to that point, the point where one is embarking on the paths of a bodhisattva, one needs to generate bodhicitta, which comes about through the cultivation of love and compassion. These minds come about through the prior cultivation of the 6 causes and 1 effect method. These lead to the cultivation of love and compassion and then bodhicitta. And with bodhicitta, one engages in the 6 perfections and progresses to Buddhahood. But in order to be able to engage in the 6 cause and 1 effect method, prior to this, one has to give rise to the mind of definite emergence. One has to give rise to this overwhelming wish to attain freedom from the suffering of samsara. So this is a point that cannot be overlooked. One has to give rise to this mind of definite emergence, this wish to be freed from suffering and a commitment to do everything possible to ensure that this comes about. Because without this wish to be freed of suffering, how can one become a bodhisattva who has the wish to free all beings from suffering? If one doesn't have the genuine wish to free oneself from suffering, how can one have the genuine wish to free all beings from suffering? Then prior to this arisal of the realization of definite emergence, one has to see that samsara is pervaded by suffering, see with vivid clarity the faults of samsara. And before one can give rise to this realization that samsara is pervaded by suffering, one has to have an intense realization of the faults of the lower realms, an intense commitment not to fall into the lower realms, not to create the causes that will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And in order to give rise to that first realization, one needs a mind that is restrained, a mind, so translated as a mind that is subdued. This is the practice of ethics. A mind that is subdued, a mind that is restrained, is the practice of ethics. So when the mind is subdued or restrained, then one's physical behavior is, one's way of speaking is. So what should be very clear now, when we've gone from the final goal right back to the beginning, is that ethical conduct is the foundation for all realizations. Without a mind of restraint, one will not be committed to turn away from non-virtue and only accumulate virtue to ensure good rebirth. One will not have the basis to be able to effectively meditate on the faults of samsara, and therefore no wish for liberation will arise, no genuine wish for liberation. And without that, no genuine wish for enlightenment can arise. So the correct way to understand this first line, the seed of Buddhahood, is that seed of Buddhahood is actually the mind of ethical conduct, the mind of restraint that restrains one's way of thinking and thereby physical actions and way of communicating.
마송나 기부 친구의 산조고가 토비 치료고 남냠된 전시생기 군에 나제 안에 파시중이 냠된 제발라야 당고 누가 이수를 보고 해서 디메나 아니 요아마 그래서 잡아치는 게 최냐는 지도 말해서 말해지 나는 코알에 코에 두마 타다 빵제 요모가 타다 사번에 제가 빵제 탈바세디 그래서 코에 두마를 탈게 탈바시 토발아야 디토비를 남냐는 제발라 당고 누가 예주도 출입성 말해서 니마성발라 탈비를 남냐는 지도야 말해서 아디나시 깨와치마 나송들의 탈치 타다 미고마 토발라 야 출입성 거고 누가 예주도 출입성 거래 티마성발이나 깨와치마 하다 마성을 누가를 탈치 타다 미고 토토 말해서 얘네 민자가 출입 누가 예주도 출입성야 디 산게 깨와치마 하다 미고마 토비 있다라야 인디송고도 깨와치마 아니 가서 탈바 탈비고마 토야 되나이나 람냠네 제발이야 다볼면서 예주도 출입성 거래 산게 고마 토비 치 람냠네 제발이야 누가 예주도 출입성 거래 제가 누가 예수님 예주도 출입성에 돼 매나 말이 가시네 다 믿어지 매나 다 매가지 민지된 당보디 냠네 제오래서
The next line, so you cannot do without meditative practice. So this line needs to be understood in a broader way than what we have here. And the broader way connects it to what we have been covering thus far. So the way that we can equally translate you cannot do without would be to say you are helpless, you are without hope, there is no method for you. If you are without, and now what we've been referring to before, the seed of Buddhahood, this ethical conduct. If you are without, if you are not governed by a mind of restraint, governed by ethics, then your situation remains helpless, hopeless. There's nothing you can do about this. You have to cultivate ethical conduct because this is the foundation of everything that you hope to achieve. If you have the sincere wish not to fall into the lower realms, without a mind of ethics, you will not be able to refrain from creating the causes to fall in the lower realms. If you have a wish to be free from all forms of suffering and never attain even the slightest suffering but abide in a state of lasting peace, without ethics, one can never even approach the attainment of the path towards liberation. Without ethics, one will continue to have a mind that is disturbed by the afflictions and will be dominated by worldly affairs. One will not be able to effectively come to understand the suffering nature of samsara, the very starting point to progress to liberation. And without giving rise to the sincere wish for liberation, it's not possible to give rise to a sincere wish for enlightenment. So therefore, ethical conduct, the seed for Buddhahood, is the foundation for all these realizations. And if sitting here you have a hope, you have the wish to become a bodhisattva, you have the wish to become a being of great benefit in this world, the starting point is to cultivate an ethical outlook. Without this, one is in a helpless situation. One has no hope of achieving such a goal. There is no method other than cultivating as the foundation ethical conduct.
지호지 순도와 되네자 되네기 리마이스 예지데 추름 소에 군노데 되시 뭐데 되시 가시시에 바다 가서 되시 쇼바시 되시에 바나시 나고 군노데라 코에 동안 가서데 개와지마 하다 미고와 토고 토드게 산게 군이라고 되니게 산다 니 군이 라제 리마이스 예지데 추름 소에 되게 맞아 세디기 아니 이제 지금 최계단 지금 통해 리마이스 예지데 추름 소나 디 Bendigo 충충치다 하는데 지게 니 말에 다들이 들은 게 지고를 해야지 공모들라 좀 동안에 다시 깨워지면 하다는 거가 토부도 세대 토지 군대 나지 공모 이 통해 리마이스 예지데 추름 쓰고래.
I'm assuming now it's abundantly clear the need to develop this mind of restraint, to have an ethical mind and be guided and dominated by this ethical mind. So now to link back to what we looked at in some detail last time, in order to give rise to an ethical outlook, one has to expand one's vision. One's mind needs to become much broader than it is perhaps right now. Because a mind that is dominated by the wish for worldly happiness and to overcome everyday problems and to achieve everyday successes and pleasures, this is a mind pervaded by the 8 worldly concerns. And as long as we have such a narrow mind, where we are only looking to this life, and this is our primary concern, then we may be ethical, but our ethics will be weak, and the power of those imprints that we accumulate will be weak, and the ability to lift our mind up to a greater goal, that ability will not be cultivated. Our mind will be too weak to lift up to a stronger goal. So therefore, to develop an ethical outlook, we need to look beyond this life. We need to be focused on our future lives. We need to see the suffering that awaits any being that falls into the lower realms. And we need to see this with vivid clarity, so as through the power of that realization, we are shaken awake from our stupa and we no longer remain dominated by the wish for worldly pleasures and to overcome worldly difficulties. But we do everything we can not to fall into the lower realms. And this will give rise to a much more powerful mind of ethics. And that is our foundation, our starting point. Here, one may have some doubt, because generally in the world we need to act in an ethical way, and people are criticized for not being ethical, for being unethical. So what's being said here is one needs to have an ethical conduct focused on achieving the goal of a good rebirth as a human or God. But even in the world, people who want to be praised and strive to be praised, to have a good reputation and to achieve wealth and material comfort, they may also be acting ethically. So what is the difference between these two? The person who's guarding their ethics in order to achieve a comfortable life, to have a good reputation, and to have material success, such an ethical outlook is a virtuous mind. A person who's guarding their ethics so as to achieve a good rebirth, to not be born in the lower realms, but rather to accumulate the causes to be born as a human or God, their mind of ethics is also virtuous. So on this level, they're identical. Both minds are virtuous. Where they differ is their strength. And they differ vastly in terms of their strength.
수고를 야고 팽거로 봐. 근데 맨디 아직 제조 두 먹고를 제대 고매디 사회도 대를 좀도 두다 되네. 먹고지 제대가 사자면은 장마 장냐면서 면서 두다 제대가 사는 면서 찍고 사와래. 두다 제대가 사회 디기 가르스네 맨디다님도 두 흉체 보여봐야 디기见起来 맨디 나들이야 이거 개 두고 이거 제 두고 말해 제 모두가 두고 나서 판 두고 가서 디판에 차버려 누구 믿어요 가서 디기见起来나들이야 나서 흉체라 제거로 봐 그래서 맨사와 지과래데 지기 두도 안 맞잖아 장마 장냐시 사용돼 수고를 한 거래 지기 두 맨사와 지과 말에 두도 안 제대 두 먹고 제대 나지 사와이나 안 디기 见起来나들 누구 맨사와 지과래데 이내야 누구 봐
So, for example, if someone's diagnosed with an illness, or two people are diagnosed with the illness, the same illness, and they're given the same medication, and this medication is good, it will lead to them healing. But they are also advised not to to avoid perhaps certain foods, because they would be contrary to the health outcome that they are hoping for. Then the one person takes their medicine as prescribed and avoids those foods, they will heal. The other person takes the medicine as prescribed, but doesn't avoid the food that should be avoided, and they're both taking the medicine. No difference there. But the one heals, and the other one's situation doesn't get better.
Ni kewa chima khada mi ko to du sen bi khada mi ko ba to ba ni ten de la ana nga ju chi chi ya ko da shan la kan de ko ha ya ko se ten za khada mi ko ba to du sen bi de ne sa ba di sam da je de ne lu ni je de chu lu so wa yin da ye chu lu di be ne me du me ba de ji ba de ga san ye ju ma so le ta de ni ye ma ye ju je je ne khada mi ko ba de ne lu de ba sam ba je chu lu so wa za ni de le de ne a kewa chima khada mi ko ba to tu go le nada lu ye je de na tam nian da 哪里也给他请哪里编就古什么，这对差不接受了，对象公文的嘛，对象就这么接下来。这上说的当面的呀，说的编就要回来呀，说的忘记签过来呀，说的电话要回来呀，你那个电来差不数全部就来啥的，你那个差不数全部来这，俺另外是也这个出这么送完钱呢，出这么的也会送通过嘛的，这上出这么送完账嘛都。 你不写了以后嘛，这是嘛的啦，这个咱们上人有个学过吧，你那个你那个上班的工作的人，那么多对下书全部书那个对下好了地不了吧？其实给我另外也是对出生在别个书穷着去，地不好了对下好了书吃着去，第一年都说完呢，这上第对下地不对书吃着去，这样就给我起码。 하다 미고 또 유차 두고 말해. 제가 문제를 드리. 제가 두단 제비 두 수십보다 제시를 매나시 되다. 이 가서 우리 담년장이 되지 순서야 돼.
So someone who's guarding their ethics in order to achieve a rebirth freed from the lower realms, in other words, a good rebirth, then they can be likened to the patient who's following the doctor's advice completely, taking the medication, avoiding the foods that are contrary to their situation. And so they are practicing this mind of ethics, or cultivating this mind of ethics, and thereby creating the causes for good rebirths. Another practitioner who's cultivating a mind of ethics in order to achieve a good rebirth, but their motivation is mixed by these eight worldly concerns. They want to be known as an ethical person, so they want a good reputation. They want to be known as perhaps as a meditator. They want to be known as a Buddhist. So they're concerned about their reputation. They're concerned about perhaps having some influence on people, so some prestige. So here what we see is that we have two people both trying to cultivate an ethical outlook, but the one has a motivation freed from the eight worldly concerns, and the one doesn't. So the person whose motivation is mixed with eight worldly concerns, their motivation is going to be mixed with attachment. So attachment to reputation and so forth. Attachment is non-virtuous. So they're trying to cultivate an ethical outlook, that's virtuous. But they're doing so with a mind of attachment, non-virtuous. So what you have here is the outcome, the strength of the outcome is going to be mixed. The stronger the attachment, the weaker the virtuous result. So therefore, we can see here the need to cultivate ethics, but do so with a pure motivation, a motivation separated from these eight worldly concerns. To express slightly differently then what has just been said about the motivation through which one should cultivate ethical conduct is to ensure that one's cultivating the mind of ethics not with a wish with benefit in this life, but with a far broader outlook, with a more expansive mind, that thinking about our future lives, And then if one is engaging in Buddhist practice with this more expansive, broad outlook, then one is not going to be overcome by this life's concerns. In other words, the 8 worldly concerns. So in this line we're looking at, the second one in the 12th verse, it ends here with meditative practice. So you cannot do without meditative practice. So the way to understand this term meditation is through its, perhaps best through its English synonyms. So the word that's translated as meditation can equally be translated as habituation or familiarity. So that is the meaning of meditation. What one is trying to do in meditating on the Buddhist topics is strengthen our habituation to virtuous minds, and thereby weaken our habituation to non-virtuous minds. This is the meaning of meditation, and it's done through 2 meditative techniques, one being analytical meditation, and the second being placement meditation. So we'll look at then what is meant first by analytical and then placement meditation in the context of ethics. So one starts by engaging in analytical meditation, which is meditation of analysis, of investigation, of thinking. And here one reflects on the benefits of the mind of ethics and the faults of being unethical. And here one engages in a variety of analysis, seeing that if one is ethical, one will create the causes for good rebirth, one creates the foundation for liberation and the foundation thereby for enlightenment, etc. So one goes through all the benefits of ethics. And the faults of being unethical, one creates the causes for suffering in this and future lives and so forth. So here, this is how one engages in analytical meditation on ethics. And then when one is developing this understanding of what is meant by ethics, one takes it down to not beyond the need to be ethical, but what is meant by ethics. And here we can think of the 10 non-virtues. And we can continue our analytical meditation, think of situations that we have found ourselves in and we're likely to find ourselves in. What is the ethical response? Not just responses in our way of speaking or way of acting, but how to ensure our mind is ethical. How to ensure our mind is ethical no matter what situation we find ourselves in. And here in this analytical meditation, we are developing this mind of ethics. And this mind of ethics, remember, we can express in another way. It's a mind of restraint or a subdued mind. So here we're developing this mind of restraint where we wish to restrain from unethical ways of thinking. And when this has arisen, we commit to ensuring that at all times, no matter whom we encounter, no matter what situations we encounter, we remain ethical. And this then is done in reliance on 2 other minds, the minds of mindfulness and introspection. So we utilize mindfulness in our meditation and when we're not in meditation. And mindfulness is holding the object. So whatever we're doing, we ensure that we're remembering that we need to be ethical. And its companion, introspection, is also utilized. Introspection is often likened to a spy. It's another mind looking at what is going on in our mental process. It is ensuring that mindfulness is performing its function, that its mindfulness is keeping ethics present. And as soon as introspection notices that mindfulness has lost its object of ethics, then mindfulness again is recalled to bring back ethics. So this is how, both in meditation and out of meditation, we utilize mindfulness and introspection. And then in this analytical meditation, when we come to a conclusion, when you feel, for example, when you feel a strong wish, strong desire to live an ethical life and to be ethical in all circumstances, then we stop analyzing And we go into the second type of meditation, placement meditation. So this placement meditation is where we place our mind on the object of meditation. Whereas before, we would analyze the object of meditation. So before, we analyzed the object, which was ethics. Now we're placing the mind on ethics. So this is where we hold the object undistractedly in a concentrated way. So whatever realization or understanding we've come to in our analytical meditation, we then place our mind on it with stillness, with clarity, without distraction. And this too serves to strengthen our habituation, our familiarity to the mind of ethics. And through doing this, going through this process repeatedly over a sustained period, we become ever more familiar with ethics. And thereby, it starts to pervade us not just in meditation, but in all our activities.
Bendigo sang tobne da sang go to show ji sang go to ba la lam nyam ne ya ho che go de le che ba la and den che ba che and dirin ma ju ge che di wi lu de na ji ja wa chi ma na ta da mi lu de che ba che ji to bu di da ya na so le ma ta ma da ta bu na so le ta che ta da mi go to bu di da ya ne ta da mi go to che den de ya ne sang ji capacity to nyamesha le pemba to the sanjo ko to ya ji nyame ji yi jame ba de kewa chi ma ta da mi ko to bi che do ne ju ju ma yi ju sa sa wi de ji ma sa de somebody de ni ya ne ya do to ta ya di da su ju sa ya di sha di ya ye chi mo sha ko ba de ni ge samlo ta de mi ni yi ju de 早已经是的，上面这个这个样的样大，你那个大白的出生出来的，现在你那个这大土一年说出的，他的米国王他也给有生活的，那这样很多当然这个另外有这个现在特别教我主要的，所以给的有别就是他那些呀，这个过去了就会的。 那些刚好也基本大家说几百年来讲，人家这样给我的随便年来讲的，人家最主要的你那个讲的呗，嘛是要不的上去，你那讲的话的要不的没那讲吧，那忙吧呢，那讲那个也上去，搞我红去，那呀，你去看见的，那最主要的，那你那讲的最主要的忙吧呢，你那个年来的，现在的那个要去啊，俺就叫我去买呢，电去为了什么去托接电台了呀？那个去这个调个这个程序线加一些呀，那这块是里面的这样或接多，用我说甚至，你那个莫能解决，莫能解的，你那个这个给我啥些个，你那说这个都真的，去这干嘛还是我们那工业，你那个你们那个那上单位的，他们给我提呀，给我提呀，那。 给我呀，俺你给我带来的呢，三九个我就是托马的，俺是甚至的他们也全部去托马学噻的，那么说这个，这个那么呢，说的故事里面点把它怎么的呀？你系列我学噻，好多些呢，这个怎么呀？那那啥，我车上有个地没去，那个要不要的，那有时他钱去，也没要不去托学，是的，没能来的，有些呗，那这个。 你那个上面是大白，当然这个，但他那美国把这个举赛过的，第二起码电视里面就么特别举赛过的，举赛完再点点的，那第二但是车里然后就给出去啊，然后第二起码给出去啊，那有点然后就给出去啊，你结婚那也不过了，你现在这样子，你学这个年代嘛，这个没有路去结婚路的结婚吧。
Then to conclude just by taking what we've looked at tonight and including it within a body of meditation. So one can start your meditation tonight or tomorrow morning reflecting that everything that we do is motivated to achieve happiness and to overcome problems and difficulties. And this is something shared with all sentient beings. And we take this thought further and generate the wish to become a Buddha for their sake, to become a being who's skilled and can guide beings in how to achieve their own enlightenment. But in order to actually fulfill this lofty attainment, and in fact, in order to be able to sincerely generate this aspiration, one needs to cultivate a mental path, the paths of the Dharma. And in order to do that, one needs a particular rebirth, a rebirth such as we have right now. And so here we can reflect on this precious human rebirth and its great meaning, the great purpose that can be achieved with this life. And then we take this further to think about this life can end at any time though, and my next rebirth could start at any moment, and it's either going to be a fortunate rebirth or one in the suffering lower realms. And here then we commit to striving to achieve further good rebirths so that we can continue with such a basis like we have now, to continue to cultivate the minds of the Mahayana Dharma within ourselves. And then we can engage in the meditation on ethical conduct, because now we have expanded our vision, our mind has become wide and expansive and far-sighted. So now we can think about ethics from a far broader perspective, looking to ensure we attain good rebirths. And this more powerful mind then will lead us to want to develop the foundation of ethical conduct, the foundation upon which good rebirths is achieved, the foundation upon which the mind of definite emergence is achieved, and the foundation upon which bodhicitta itself is achieved. And we commit to developing a mind of restraint, and thereby we don't engage in any physical or verbal activities that bring harm to others. And after that, you can take your meditation briefly, so that can be a main point, and briefly onto the generosity, the mind that wants to give, the mind that wants to help, whether it's through material giving to those in need, or offerings to the 3 jewels, or helping with our time and our skills and talents. We generate the wish to help and be of benefit in this world. And then we meditate briefly on patience, cultivating a mind that stays, a mind of restraint, a mind that stays undisturbed in the face of adversity. And thereafter we generate the mind of joyous perseverance. And here this is where we give rise to the mind of joy in this practice we're engaging in. And we reflect on the qualities, the virtuous causes we are accumulating, we reflect on our own spiritual development, and we generate joy. And we commit to continuing to engage in this daily practice, no matter what obstacles we encounter, and we commit to these minds of virtue that we've accumulated now, that we've cultivated now, to not leaving them on the meditation cushion, but trying to keep them present throughout our day. And then we conclude with prayer, where we make strong aspirations that from life to life, may we only achieve precious human rebirths, and in each and every life at a young age may we meet a spiritual teacher and come to spend our lives receiving teachings on the Mahayana Dharma and wholeheartedly committing ourselves to train and cultivate those minds within us. And may our spiritual teachers and all the spiritual teachers in this world, may they have long lives, may all their aspirations be fulfilled. May all the conflict and strife in this world, both inner and outer, may this ease, and may inner and outer peace prevail in this world. May all illnesses be healed, and may more and more beings come to meet the Dharma, and have interest in the Dharma, and strive to cultivate the minds of the Dharma within themselves. In this way, we then dedicate the virtue that we've accumulated. So this meditation, then, if one can do so, repeatedly over a sustained period, each time you do it, you're accumulating the causes to achieve the results of good rebirths and so forth. And the more you do this meditation, the greater the habituation, the familiarity to this way of thinking becomes. So therefore, not only are you creating more and more virtuous causes that will lead to desired results, but those causes become ever more powerful. So this here is a formula to live a life of great meaning. So our time is up. This opportunity is impermanent. So we'll continue tomorrow, and we'll just do dedication prayers now, with no praises to Tara. So thank you very much.